All right, so let's get into it. Trying to understand ancient prophecies, it can feel a lot like being a detective showing up to a really old, really confusing crime scene. You've got all these clues, some conflicting testimonies, and a big mystery you have to solve. Well, today, we're putting on our detective hats to crack a case that stumped people for centuries.
And this brings us right to the heart of the investigation, the big question. When you're looking at a prophecy, are you supposed to be searching for one single meaning? Or could it actually be pointing to a bunch of different events, maybe spread out across time? I mean, how you answer that question changes everything.
So, to start, a lot of interpreters have this kind of core principle. You could call it a no double-dipping rule. The basic idea is that a piece of text should have one single intended meaning. Because, think about it, if one sentence can mean two or three totally different things, how can we ever really know what it means at all? It makes the whole process feel like a total guessing game.
And this is where we meet our prime suspect in this whole interpretive mystery, the theory of double fulfillment. This is the idea that a single prophetic statement can have, a near-term fulfillment that happens pretty soon, and then a second, more distant fulfillment way, way down the road. It's a really popular theory, but like that no double-dipping rule suggests, it can make things complicated.
So, what do you do when you stumble upon a prophecy that just seems to scream for more than one fulfillment? A case where the clues just don't add up to one neat and tidy solution.
Okay, let's get specific. To really dig into this, we're going to look at a case study I'm calling the Elijah puzzle. Seriously, it's like a cliffhanger left at the very, very end of the Old Testament, and it sets up this fascinating mystery for us to solve.
Here's our first piece of evidence, Exhibit A, straight from the book of Malachi. And it's a pretty direct promise. Before this big day of the Lord happens, the prophet Elijah himself will be sent back. Seems pretty straightforward, right? A clear prediction. Now, first glance, the New Testament seems to solve this whole puzzle for us right away. We've got multiple witnesses all pointing to one guy, John the Baptist. We're told he'll come in the spirit and power of Elijah, and then Jesus himself seems to close the case, saying flat out, he is the Elijah who was to come. Okay, case closed. Seems pretty open and shut.
But in any good detective story, there is always a twist. Just when we think we've got our man, a new piece of evidence comes to light that throws the whole investigation into chaos.
And here it is, the curveball. Our main suspect, John the Baptist, is asked directly, point blank, "Are you Elijah?" And his answer, "I am not." Whoa. So, how can he be the fulfillment of the prophecy if he denies it himself? This, right here, is where our investigation gets really, really interesting.
Okay, so with this conflicting evidence on the table, we've basically got three competing theories now. Three different ways people have tried to solve the Elisha puzzle. So let's line them up like suspects in a police lineup and see how each one holds up to the evidence.
All right, theory number one is our old friend double reference. This one basically says, yes, but. Yes, John was a fulfillment of sorts, but he was just the warm-up act. The literal Elijah, the original guy, is still going to show up in the future. Theory number two, generic fulfillment, kind of zooms out. It argues the prophecy isn't about one single person, but a whole line of Elijah-like figures throughout history. And then there's theory number three, single fulfillment. This one claims John was the complete and final fulfillment, just not in the way anybody saw coming.
So let's really dig into that third theory, the single fulfillment view. Its supporters argue that it actually solves the entire mystery without having to break our no double-dipping rule. And the solution hinges on a really clever twist.
See, the crucial idea here is that prophecy isn't always a straight line from A to B. Sometimes the fulfillment shows up in a way that just completely surprises everyone, turning all their expectations on their head.
Okay, so here's how this theory cracks the case. Pay close attention. When the religious leaders asked John, "Are you Elijah?" they were asking if he was the literal, reincarnated Elijah who was taken up to heaven centuries ago. And to that question, his answer, "I am not," was 100% true. He wasn't that person. But, and this is the key, he was the one who fulfilled the prophetic role and the mission of Elijah. He was the right answer to a totally different and much more important question.
And this is where that quote from Jesus makes so much sense. That little phrase, "if you are willing to accept it," is so telling. It suggests the fulfillment was absolutely real, but you had to shift your perspective to see it. You had to look past the super-literal expectation to see the deeper spiritual reality. John was the promised Elijah, but he showed up in an enigmatic, totally unexpected way.
So this one specific puzzle, it actually blows the doors open on a much bigger, and let's be honest, often very heated debate about reading prophecy in general. And that is, how do you navigate that tricky line between the literal and the figurative?
So take this classic prophecy from Isaiah about turning swords into farming tools. Some people read this figuratively. They'd say this peace is a spiritual thing, happening right now in the hearts of believers. Others read it much more literally. They argue it's pointing to a future physical kingdom of actual peace on earth. You see, it's the same exact text, but you get two wildly different conclusions, and it all comes down to their starting approach.
So what's the takeaway? Well, the most crucial point is that there's no simple formula here. You can't just slap a label on yourself like, I'm a literal interpreter, and call it a day. The best interpreters know it's not that easy. They use both approaches, and they let the text itself be the guide. It takes careful work, not just applying some rigid system.
And that brings us to the final conclusion from our whole investigation. If just debating these big, abstract systems doesn't really get us anywhere, then what does? What's the right way forward? I love this quote from Greg Banson because it just nails it. He says, progress isn't made by arguing about vague labels. It's made in what he calls hand-to-hand exegetical combat. I mean, what a phrase. It basically means you have to get down in the trenches and really wrestle with the grammar, the context, and the specific phrasing of the actual text. It's all about focusing on the evidence that's right there in front of you. So at the end of the day, we end up right back where we started, but hopefully with a new perspective. The Elijah puzzle shows us that how we interpret things isn't just some boring academic exercise. It forces us to ask a really big question. How does the way we read, the rules we use for any text, ultimately shape the very core of what we believe is true?